capacity, that's 150% of capacity. The population is 150% of capacity. So what we're also finding is we have a significant number of non-violent offenders who are being housed in the Illinois Department of Corrections. But there are also a significant number of individuals who are housed in Cook County Jail and jails across the state waiting to be sentenced. 70% of individuals who are sitting in county jail right now are sitting there on some pre-detainee sentencing, meaning they are waiting to be sentenced. But they have been found guilty, they haven't been adjudicated guilty, but they're sitting there because they're poor. So what are the options that we're going to take, and what are the steps we're going to take to make sure that we are not criminalizing poverty? So part of what we're talking about, where we will be talking about for this session, is how we interact and how we make sure that we are decriminalizing poverty. So that's really what I want to hear from you. I want to make sure you have 2 pieces of paper. Well, 3 pieces of paper, really. 1, you should have an overview of Senate Bill 1304. It's police reform. It's the police reform law. Does everybody have that? If you don't have it, raise your hand. We'll get you one. The second one, it should say the Illinois Criminal Justice Reform Commission at the top of the page. You have that? It's a two-sided piece of paper. Everybody have that? The third one, there is a report from the Great Cities Institute at the University of Illinois, Chicago. I want you to have that report also. That report does a wonderful job of demonstrating what we are looking at from a poverty standpoint, and how poverty is impacting impacting the criminal justice or the crimes that we are seeing across our city. So that's some of the information that you have, you should have. If you don't have it, we'll make sure we'll get you a copy. But that information is going to be the basis of our discussion tonight and what we're going to be talking about. And again, you should also, does everybody have a card so they can write questions down? Everybody have a card? At least one? Okay. Because we want you to participate in this process. We want you to, we have some wonderful experts here, including the commander from this area. So we wanted to show this is our partners in the Chicago Police Department. I want to thank Commander Johnson for being here because he is truly a partner. We all know, we've seen the challenges that have been going on with law enforcement, not just in the city of Chicago, across the country. But we have a lot of officers who are doing some amazing work. They are running towards danger when other folks are running away, and we want to commend them. But before I take my seat, I also want to thank our host from Olive Harvey for having us here, for making this space available. We reached out to Olive Harvey. They said, Representative, what do you need? It's available to you. So we want to thank Olive Harvey and the wonderful staff of the City College of Chicago for having us. And with that, I want to take my seat because I'm ready to hear from our wonderful panelists, but I'm also ready to hear from you. So thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you very much, State Representative Harvey Sims. You know, we always try to bring information to the people and to the community to inform us, because we need to be informed. So this evening we brought 3 expert panelists that I would like to introduce to you to inform us about the policing and criminal justice reform. We have Ms. Teresa Cordova, who's the director of the Great Cities Institute at the University of Illinois, Chicago, to my left. Please, you can. To my right, we have Ms. Kadeen Bennett, Staff Attorney and Legislative Counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union of Illinois. And we have Mr. Kevin Johnson, the Commander of the 5th District for the Chicago Police Department. Mr. Kevin Johnson. What we're going to do right now, I'm going to ask the panelists to expound and give some brief words on their work and how it relates to the police and the criminal justice system. So please enjoy it. If you have any questions, please write them down on the index cards so that when we get to them, to that portion, we can address that accordingly. So at this time, I'd like to pass the mic over to Ms. Teresa Cordova.
Good evening, everyone. How are you this evening?
Good evening.
It is indeed an honor to be here with you. I want to thank and acknowledge Representative Sims and thank him for the invitation. The reason I've been invited to be here to share some of our work with you has to do with a report that we just did on joblessness here in Chicago. So first of all, let me just say something very quickly about the Great Cities Institute at the University of Illinois, Chicago. This is a university which prides itself on its urban engagement, and the Great Cities Institute exists for the purpose of being engaged, right, with Chicago and the region. And so as director of the Institute, and I'm a relatively new director to the Institute, I'm very much committed to how can the work that we do at UIC be relevant and be useful on the issues that we're facing. So we have a center called Great Cities Institute. Part of the question is how can we truly be great, right, in the city of Chicago if we have so much unemployment and so much disparity in wealth. So that was one of the things that motivated us to want to do some kind of report that really addressed what are some of the current issues going on. We know we're all concerned about violence, right, in our communities. And so part of what we were looking at is the issue of joblessness and unemployment. So it was mentioned that you have access to a few copies of these that were out front. I have more out in the car, but you can also go to the web and find it. It would be on the Great Cities Institute website. On our front page, you can find it. So I'm not speaking directly on criminal justice, right? I know that's our topic here tonight, but what I want to do is give context, right, to the issues around criminal justice. What's going on in the context of that? And I'm really not going to tell you anything you don't already know, but what I am going to do is affirm, right, and complement what you have already been saying among yourselves through the research that we've done. So you know, for example, that jobs have left many of the communities here on the South Side, whether it's because of the loss of the steel mills, the manufacturing. So we've got some statistics, right, about the amount of companies that left and the job loss. So part of the first point I want to make is that a lot of the conditions that we're seeing today is really the outcome of 40 years of economic trends, right? And not just in this city, but nationwide. But it especially hit manufacturing communities. So several years ago, 30 years ago, we did some research comparing African Americans and Latinos and where they were in the labor force. And the majority of Latinos and African Americans, for example, looking at the 1980 census, were working in manufacturing. But by the late 70s and into the 80s, those jobs left, right? And so a lot of what you then saw is the rise of low-skilled jobs. That's when you saw also shifts in populations. But what was left, right, were these neighborhoods where money left the neighborhoods. We call that disinvested neighborhoods. So along with the money leaving, left the jobs, left the commercial districts, right, left the retail, right? And so part of what we're seeing now is really the outcome of those 30, 40 years of economic trends. And so while we've seen the downtown boom, we haven't seen necessarily all of our neighborhoods boom. So what we did in this study, we were asked to do this by the Alternative Schools Network. It was presented at a hearing at the Chicago Urban League, and it was a supplement to, we presented the research first, and then young people themselves got up and spoke. So this report that we did really is meant to be a supplement to the voices of young people themselves. And those young people are saying, we want to work. We want to work. And they're also saying that if we worked, we would not be on the streets. We'd be busy at work and we wouldn't have time to be on the streets. And those are some of the kinds of things that people said. So what we were asked to do, which is what we did in this report, was to look at data from 2005 through 2014. Now we did some work where we went actually back to the 1970s, but mostly this report is focused on 2005 to 2014. And we looked at it comparing blacks, Latinos, whites. We looked at it, also looking at male versus female. We did it for Chicago, which we then compared to the state, which we then compared to the US as a whole. And in a couple of instances, we looked at LA and we looked at New York to see where Chicago is in that. And these figures are both illuminating and very disturbing, because one of the things that we found in the city of Chicago, for example, if you look at across all groups, African Americans have the highest rates of joblessness, both among 16 to 9, I'm sorry, I forgot to say also 16 to 19-year-olds and then 20 to 24-year-olds. The age was the key part of this. So what we found is that African Americans between 16 to 19 and 20 to 24-year-old blacks fared worse, had the highest rates of joblessness compared to any other group in Chicago, in Illinois, and in the US. And that blacks in Chicago did worse than any other place that we looked at, right? So not only did African Americans do worse in comparison to other groups in the city of Chicago, they did worse than any other African Americans in Illinois, the US as a whole, New York, and LA. We looked at employment rates, and then we looked at figures related to out of school and out of work. So some of what you may have heard in the news, for example, was that staggering figure of 47% of black males between the ages of 20 and 24 are neither in school nor working. All right, so that's almost half, right, of our young African American men between the ages of 20 and 24 who are neither in school nor working, right? When you look at the overall percentage that are working, of blacks, females, and males, it's about 12.4% in 2005, but when you look at 2014, it's pretty much about the same thing. So it sort of has bottomed out around 12%, although it did dip a little bit after the recession, but it did, and where for other groups went, well, I shouldn't say other groups, for whites it went back up, but for African Americans it did not go back up much after the recession, just a little tiny bit. So that's a crisis, right, in terms of the rates. For Latinos, what we found is even though they fare better, it's not a whole lot better, and it's still not as well as whites, but the concern for the Latinos is that their numbers are actually going down at a higher rate, right, so that they're dropping at a really severe rate. So part of the question then is, what does that mean in terms of, I mean, and there's lots of figures here, and you can look at this, and I'd be happy to go over like particular tables. We provide tables and figures and graphs and that kind of thing. But then the question, and I guess I should say one other thing. We end the report by talking about, well, what are some of the implications of that kind of chronic unemployment? Because that was one of our conclusions, was that it's chronic, right? And so what happens when it becomes multiple generations, or when it happens to these young people who then don't get jobs for long periods of time? It starts to be chronic. But the other thing we found out, and this is the other data that we did maps. And we also found that besides being chronic, it's concentrated, so that it's worse in certain neighborhoods than in others. So when we look at the jobless rate overall in Chicago, it's worse where there's the highest concentration of African Americans, right? And you can see some of the maps in that report. So it's chronic and it's concentrated. What we say in the end of the report is that has ramifications, right? That has real impacts on young people's lives. It has impacts on what their lifetime wages are going to be. It has impacts on their employability later in life. But we also know from other research that it starts to impact mental health issues, depression, overall happiness, and it has an impact also on things like violence, right? So we know there's a connection. So part of the question is then, what do we do about it? And this is one of those situations where it's really all hands on deck. This has to be attacked from multiple ways. To the extent that there are jobs out there, how do you connect skills, right, and talents of young people, right? How do you increase their skills so they match the jobs that are available? What happened to on-the-job training? What happened to Job Corps, workforce development, and so on? So what kinds of things can be done to increase opportunities for more jobs? Secondly, what are the kinds of things that can be done to bring back anchor jobs, anchor employment back into the neighborhoods? Because one of our points is, because it's so concentrated in neighborhoods, we really need to look at a neighborhood strategy to address some of this. So what can be done at the neighborhood level? Can there be subsidies? You know, we can put subsidies to build up downtown, right? Why can't we have subsidies to build up neighborhoods, right? What's it gonna take to build up neighborhoods so that people in those neighborhoods benefit and don't just get pushed out, right? So you wanna build the neighborhoods so that people who are from those neighborhoods and live in those neighborhoods are the ones who benefit from that. So that's the sort of the second strategy, right? First one is matching skills with jobs that do exist. The second one is bringing jobs to the neighborhoods. And then a third one, again, multi-pronged, but a third one is something we think is really important, is to build small business incubators and to help build up the small business sector of neighborhoods. Because one of the things that you know, that we know, right, is that young people are so talented, right? They're just so talented. They're so creative. So how do you take the skills and the creativity of young people and turn those into marketable goods and services that can then become the basis for rebuilding your small business sector in your neighborhoods, so then you have access to those goods and services, right? You know, we've been doing some community visioning work, and we're going to be doing some planning work over in Rosemore and in North Pullman. And one of the things that you know that people talk about, right, is wanting to have access to a lot of Black-owned businesses. So why not build up the capacity, right, of young people to be able to sort of do that? So we think things like a small incubator in each of the neighborhoods. Where in those small incubators, what you're doing is you're building up, you're helping people take their talents, turn them into some kind of marketable good or product, good or service. You're helping them get some startup capital. You're helping them do their plans, right, for what they need to do. You're helping them create a marketing plan and so on. So those are just some of the ideas, but we do think that it is a serious problem when you have such chronic and concentrated unemployment or joblessness among our young people. And when you compare it, it's comparatively worse than most other places. And there are ways in which it can be attacked, but it didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to be solved overnight. But we also, and just to sort of use this then as a transition to the topic for tonight, is that there's also a connection, right, between not having a job and then these young people finding themselves in the criminal justice or injustice system, right? So how employment can be a powerful deterrent, right, to that track. But also things like ban the box and making it not so difficult for kids once they do get into the system to be able to be employed is another really important strategy, right? How do you provide opportunities for if you make a mistake, how do you now, you have to really be punished for your whole life for that mistake, or are there ways to bring you into employment? So hopefully that's helpful for helping to give some thoughts to adding the employment and the joblessness dimension to this. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms.